Thank you for the introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My paper today is about Europe's moral role to restore Circassian legitimate rights. Throughout history, rights have not been lost to any nation in this world except when its people have neglected their prerogative to claim their freedom and independence. The unfair, prejudiced, and oppressive decision was determined and taken in regard to the Circassians in the absence of one of the Caucasus region's oldest and largest nations, both in size and in population. Agreements and treaties made, which were, the Circassians away from, make it clear that a tragic future was awaiting Circassians. The European Union's leading role in the world requires more attention to be given to the Circassian question. Europe bears a moral obligation to restore the Circassian legitimate rights, Circassians being one of the oppressed European nations. There are several examples that can show the depth of the tragedy. Moral regression has thrown many of their ethical values and kept many in a deep slumber. Unfortunately, facts have proven that some parties have imposed a deceptive propaganda which was used as a terrible weapon in the hands of the hostile parties and proxies. Russo-Circassian War in 1864 that dispersed the Circassians in many geographical and political regions around the world between motherland and diaspora made it a disaster for this nation. The Circassians are dreaming of returning to their homeland one day. It is as if they are being held in virtual reality by dreaming of their homeland, while being unable to transcend that dream into a physical reality. It is like living in an imaginary reality or existing in fiction without physically reaching it. They intend to use propaganda, the people who are preventing that, to keep the barriers and obstacles between truth and fiction, leaving the restoration of legitimate rights elusive, unlikely, or even impossible. Article 1.2 of the United Nations Charter says all peoples have the right to self-determination. Russia's chronic failure to solve the Circassian question. The Circassians in the North Caucasus and diaspora, in addition to other non-Russian peoples in the Russian Federation, were outraged. They expressed displeasure at the Russian State Duma vote that made the teaching of any national language voluntary, while keeping Russian as the main language. The situation led to meeting of local prominent leaders who condemned the devious movements. And blatant defiance to the right of Circassians returned in general. The Circassian state has granted a refugee status to only 2 of Syria's Circassians out of 3,000 requests of those who wish to live in their homeland. People of Russian origin who ran away from Crimea several years ago have taken refuge in the North Caucasus. They were given a welcome reception and given priority to be served and treated according to first-class services. Whilst describing the situation as the door is widely open, some optimists say that those who want to return home, they are allowed to do so. The Circassians are allowed to return home by limited numbers, in fact, and within strict quotas applied in the Circassian republics. Since the Tsarist Russian invasion started in 1763, aggressive policies were implemented and still going on. Natural rights are inherent in all human beings without discrimination, but this doesn't apply to Circassians, it seems. The Russian Empire, while conspiring with other colonial powers in the region, has ignored signed agreements and treaties. Aslan Bishto wrote 277 years ago on this day, when he wrote this a few months ago, Kabarda was recognized as an independent state. Of course, when Kabarda is independent, that means that goes to Circassia as well. Sound and balanced policy leaders of the country led to the fact that our country has received the official status of the subject's international law. With no doubt, that is derived from the ruled international treaties, laws and norms. Circassians believe that Circassia's independence is not a doubtful prospect or a negotiable subject in any way. That's what the Tsarist Russian Empire has worked hard to divert. At the present time, discrimination, ill-treatment, ethnic fusion, and the destruction of the national languages of many peoples have the name of the game and the main objective of the Russian state. Nevertheless, compatriots from the North Caucasus, when they travel to other parts of the present Russian Federation, that's the people who are considered citizens in the Russian Federation, are considered immigrants. Russian authorities throughout its embassies and Russian cultural centers linked directly to the Russian Foreign Ministry, on the other hand, in order to impose the policy of fait accompli that ignores the axiomatical in order to blur the core issues. Thus, relevant international laws must be noted and understood, and as a minimum, should not accept less than dealing with everyone who wants to cooperate and to engage in dialogue, and may not waive an inalienable legitimate national rights, which must take into account the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. There are limited progress in the implementation of international protection standards, such as the FCNM, and resistance to ratification of the European Charter for regional or minority languages. The Circassian nation, which has a documented history for thousands of years, has not come from a vacuum. It had joined or enjoyed a deeply rooted human civilization in the Northwest Caucasus although not many contemporary countries existed in the region. Little by little, modern Circassians have been rediscovering the history which Russian and Soviet authorities had previously carefully stripped off all of their important and proud historical moments. Regardless of the different consecutive regimes, it is the fact that some positive signs, but not enough, were issued under the administration of Russian or former Russian President Boris Yeltsin. World and European role. The United Nations, its Commission on Human Rights, Europe, the regional countries, and other peace-loving nations must carefully consider the status of the Circassian nation. It is important to know that they have, the Circassians, they have to prepare the appropriate Circassian question file. Circassians must work hard. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights preamble to be taken into consideration. All minorities and ethnic groups must restore their full freedom. The Declaration on the granting independence to colonial countries and peoples must be enforced. Apply relevant international and domestic law. Foreign occupation and colonization must be eliminated. The question of future Circassian independence. No one will be able to influence the Circassians' principles, beliefs, and the ways that they have chosen for themselves. They will not give up their principles for civilization and humanity despite hostility. The Circassians must have a natural right to return to their homeland with no restriction. The possibility of obtaining the right of self-determination of the Circassian people must be given on the Circassian land, which is a top priority. The arrogance of the Russian authorities, the European Union, and the international community must take action to address this human tragedy in that arrogance title. There is something important to be mentioned here, that there is a group called the Miss Anchorite online. They have a video, you can watch it or see it whenever you have the time. They have published this on YouTube, and it is elaborating on whether Circassia would be an independent state in the future. And it says there that this is orchestrated based on doctrinal beliefs and constructions, the people who have done it perhaps, to have room for manipulation of values, concepts, and core issues. Those plans and schemes seem to be fabricated and promoted amongst multiple parties who have links to operators behind the scenes. This guy who was on this YouTube says, I think repatriation must be done so they can form a bigger majority in the region. And he says later in this video, if they want to be seen differently by the Russian society, I think that Circassians must return to the Orthodox faith. Because let me tell you, something. Circassians are Christians before the Russians. The oldest Christian temple can be found in Circassia. And continuous Circassians were turned to Orthodoxy by Saint Saxon Anglo. I think they have another kind of spirituality. And mixing matters randomly would complicate essential features and make elements seem more complicated. So this guy said, seemingly, this is kind of propaganda against Circassians, of course. He says, so my point is that Circassia can be independent if we take the current situation in the region. But he wanted crystallizing a plan. A roadmap is not yet available. Premature, unofficial, scattered, non-solid initiatives and seasonal mobility of Circassian circles activism will not help crystallize a proper Circassian roadmap. Based on the available evidence, documents, and testimonies, they should be eligible to act and prepare their case legally and professionally for submission to whom it may concern. There are overwhelming obstacles hindering the progress of raising crucial issues to be passed. A tremendous progress must be accomplished in a case construction process that includes a fortified file of documents, information, and claims. They should be presented to legal, human rights, and political international parties and arenas aiming to claim the legitimate rights of Circassians. And rather, it is to stress on protecting and preserving their own rights and values, and to identify peaceful means that will lead to their restoration of their freedom. This may include preparing qualified roadmap demanding legal, juridical, and political issues. This can be submitted to international experts and specialists to see retrieving the legitimate rights of the Circassians. It is important to establish and orchestrate a committee or a specialized international body or institution to be committed to conducting and implementing the procedural follow-up. This will eventually lead to the characterization and organization of the necessary tracks for the implementation of all points in the text to be prepared. However, it is essential to know that there are multiple psychological barriers that need to be overcome. Human rights and European Union's moral obligation. It is difficult to overcome the Russian intransigence and stubbornness, that deny the legitimate Circassian rights. There is much work to be accomplished, and this should be the European Union's humane, constructive role. Human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights. These values are embedded in the European Union treaties. The European Union Charter of Fundamental Rights is a clear and strong statement of United Europe, of the European Union citizens' rights. There is no doubt that the European Union is obligated to have a great role in solving the problem and obstacles and atrocities that occurred as a direct effect of the Russian Circassian War. There are contrasts and contradictions between the will and the implementation of these statements. It is no secret that there are many formalities of obstacles and procedural barriers that prevent the honoring and or appreciating the legitimate rights of the peoples to self-determination in their homelands, even those who are European peoples deprived of their rights. Fundamental rights are guaranteed nationally by the constitutions of individual countries. The Charter is consistent, the European Charter, with the European Convention on Human Rights. The Fundamental Rights Agency identifies and analyzes major trends in this field. Hence, hundreds of thousands of Circassians from the northwest Caucasus were either forced into exile to Ottoman Empire by the Tsarist authorities or left their native land deliberately following the decisive occupation of the area by the Russian army in the final years of the Greater Caucasus War. That's quoting this reference, 1817 to 1864, and shortly thereafter. The return of Circassians to their homeland must be in accordance with the relevant laws and norms and must depend on international resolutions and protection. There is a duty incumbent upon the parties concerned. Circassians have never given up hope, and this coincides with the part of Mandela's favorite poem, Invictus, by William Ernest Henley. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul. So Circassians, if they want to go back to their homeland in the right way, they have to do that under an international umbrella. The petition, there is indigenous people's rights there, and it says from time to time, Circassian individuals and organizations in different locations demand to obtain their rights in accordance with the local and international laws, but without a positive response by the Russian authorities. Even the Russian laws that depend or adopted by the constitution. Ramzan Khon, a Circassian activist from Russia's Krasnodar region, posted an unusual online petition on the website change.org. The petition calls on the Russian government, President Vladimir Putin, and the administration of Krasnodar Krai to grant indigenous rights to the Circassians who reside on the territory of the southwestern Russian region. In that regard, the Russian law does not consider all Circassians as indigenous people. Like out of the 12 Circassian tribes, maybe they consider 2 or 3 of them, like the Webech, the Shabsog, and one more. The others are not indigenous people. The Framework Convention of the Protection of National Minorities is one of the most comprehensive treaties designed to protect the rights of persons belonging to the national minorities. Non-member states must also be invited by the Committee of Ministers to become party to this convention. That's the Ministers of Europe. The United Nations rights of the indigenous peoples and nations indicates and states the adoption of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which has a positive impact on the protection of victims. States to take all necessary measures to implement the rights of indigenous peoples in accordance with the international human rights instruments without discrimination. Who are the indigenous people? People who inhabited a land before it was conquered by colonial societies and who consider themselves distinct from the societies currently governing those territories are called indigenous peoples, as defined by the United Nations Special Rapporteur to the Subcommission on Prevention of Discrimination and Protection of Minorities, Indigenous Communities, Peoples and Nations. Indigenous peoples all over the world find themselves locked in power struggles with dominant states and transnational actors who resist their claims to land, culture, political recognition, and other key factors associated with the idea of national self-determination. In May 8, 2017, the Council adopted the Council conclusions on indigenous peoples. Most importantly, the EU supported in 2007 the adoption of the United Nations Declaration on the rights of indigenous peoples. The EU is also funding projects worldwide throughout the European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights that we have to look into. Projects are run by international organizations such as the International Labour Organization, ILO, and the Office of the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights and by civil society organizations. The Council of the European Union conclusions on indigenous peoples. The European Union is founded on values of respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, and rule of law, and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. Furthermore, the prohibition of discrimination on any grounds and the respect of cultural, religious, and linguistic diversity are fundamental principles under the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. The European Union is committed to promote the respect of human rights of all, everywhere in the world. The Council recalls its conclusions and Indigenous Peoples of November 2002. For more details, we can refer to the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. The United Nations organization has not neglected to pay attention to the rights of indigenous peoples to ensure that their natural rights are guaranteed in accordance with the relevant United Nations resolutions. United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP, Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's written in different forms. The same applies to the implementation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. Arrogance being the genuine impediment of recognizing legitimate rights. Some of the most important obstacles that emerge when trying to address the Circassian affairs are arrogance and propaganda. Obviously, there is a variation between theatrical or scenes or dramatic performance. The backstage and front stage are different than the behind the scenes in different action or ineffectual. Nevertheless, the Circassians work steadily according to the quote, where there is a will, there is a way. Notwithstanding the time elapsed of more than 154 years now, the evil effects of occupation, ethnic cleansing, genocide, and deportation remains apparent. They cannot be concealed. They still have tangible consequences. What is required now is not to punish the heirs of the perpetrators of the legal successors from their vicious atrocities. On the contrary, it is the realization and recognition of the confiscated rights of the whole nation that still has its rights denied. So small peoples are targeted and so need legal protection in accordance with lofty humanitarian principles. All peaceful citizens must be dealt with in decent human manner, where human beings are civil by nature. Human civilization must be a role model to rulers and authorities. The legitimacy of military occupation and administrative dictatorship were never acceptable. The Russian colonization developed gradually since the occupation. Then consecutive regimes of the Russian state eventually annexed Circassia into Russia, in addition to re-dividing its territories. To enhance progress in restoring Circassian Azor rights, a roadmap plan must be prepared. Conclusion. A quotation was chosen to encourage perseverance while facing all obstacles and stumbling blocks. This quotation matches what has taken place and will be taken place. Trust yourself, you've survived a lot, and you will survive whatever is coming. The proper way to achieve this is don't delay today's work until tomorrow. The right steps should be taken appropriately, which is consistently with doing the right things at the right time. Accordingly, it's appropriate to mention that the author has published recently, a wise man had classified men as 5 types. The first type serves his homeland by money, the second type by work, the third by pen, the fourth with his life, and the fifth by silence. All of them would betray their homeland if they fail to do what they must do towards their homeland at the proper time. Thank you.
عادل شرخ فتاسو وشاء زرفاو وقبارم هاي تبغى شكرا سكر وبصزيها وهذه question.
Thank you.
me your presentation in general about the United Nations and the international law. I would like to go and be more specific. Do you think that some European nations, let's say England, Turkey, and so on, should take responsibility for the acts during the Russian-Circassian War, and maybe non-acting during the genocide, and should they be committed, and what the fact the acts that they should do, and with whom? I mean, who really represents us?
This is one of the most important steps that Circassians should take. There is no such an organization or association that represents the Circassians as such. There are so many right now, but none of them, I would say, is specialized in certain political issues or in such subject. But if you notice, the United Nations, Europe, everybody is worried about human rights in Africa, in Asia, and everywhere, except Circassians. Circassians are forgotten. Circassians, nobody knows about it. Why? I don't blame. If we don't take our problems, our cause to the world, nobody would know what happened. Nobody would know that we are an oppressed European nation that is deprived of all its rights. Even the people who are living there, they are not living like in a normal way, as if like the other nations living in their homeland. They are living in 5, 6 different areas. They are not even close to each other. They will not be able to form one entity like Chechnya, let's say, or Dagestan, or Abkhazia. We are scattered, and so many peoples, they live between us. I mean, not among us, between us to separate us in the homeland. And look in diaspora. In diaspora, Mohammed Khair Mansour, Circassian writer, he has statistics that in countries that got more than 3,000 Circassians in them, there are more than 50 countries in the world that they have Circassians. We are dispersed all around the world, and that's coming to answer your question. Nobody is making this problem reaching the United Nations, the European Union in the proper way. If Circassians do it, they will be able to take the fruitful results of it. If they don't, they will become Circassian. God forbid.
Just a follow-up on what you mentioned. I'm not sure if you are aware, but the Circassian Repatriation Organization, the CRO, one of its objectives is actually to raise awareness of the Circassian status across the world. The members are from all over, so it's an international organization, and we already became a member of the European Council for Refugees, and we are part of the recognized organizations in the UN as well. So the CRO is still young and it's still doing baby steps, but I think it's one of the objectives and mandates of the CRO is to raise awareness. And I encourage everyone who would like to speak with organizations, international organizations and so on to follow what the CRO is doing and maybe be part of it and do some work under the mandate of the CRO. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, I followed some of your work, your blessed work you are doing, but I'm not going to say that it's not enough. But I'm looking also towards the political issue, not only refugee issue or just repatriation. I think we, as any other nation or any people in the world, have the right to look into all of our affairs, all the elements of our nation. We are not in a kindergarten, or we are not in a camp that we all should think the same, we all should dress the same, we all should say the same things. No. We have left, we have right, we have people who just don't want to hear about their problems, and people who are looking forward to solve our problems. And there are people in between, of course.
No, definitely what you're saying is totally correct. I mean, the motto of this conference is what connects us. So the whole goal is for everyone to bring their ideas to the table and see what really connects and what is the common objectives of all Circassians who live everywhere.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I understand. And this has made me come here and make it possible for me to give you my peace of mind.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
I think the translation alone is very problem. We need a strong partner also in the nation where we are living, Europe, Germany, or the other European country. We must doing more activity also in the diaspora, the same organization, cultural activity, or the political activity. We need also sponsor from UN. If we have a big network, we can do many things. We can have also activity with AO or the United Nations. This organization for us is very important also. Yeah.
Thank you. I agree with you that there are things to be done. And I would like to say something that I would say the average people say, that God wouldn't listen from you if you don't ask Him. If we don't ask the world, nobody will listen to us. If we need to make our problem here, we have to say something. We have to have something written, taken to them. We have to go on to talk to them. The European Union, I think, got the moral, that's why my paper is in this subject. They got the moral obligation and role for this and for solving our problem, to restore our rights. We are a European, a small European nation, deprived of its essential rights, natural rights. Human rights are given to everybody, all around the world, except us. But if we don't do it, nobody will do it, and will do it, on our behalf. We have to do it, or at least we have to start. I'm sure we will have lots of friends to stand with us, because we have the documents, we have the proof, we have the tangible consequences of what has happened with us, and that's why it is. We have a strong case to take to the world. People who are ready to do it.
Yeah, was a last question.
I think it's very important. One issue is that we have to educate ourselves on this issue. If you go to your casa in your home country and ask the people there. You'll be surprised the lack of information from our side on our genocide. So that's also important. Go back to your family, ask your son, ask your father, ask your brother, ask your sister, what do you know about genocide? So in order for us to let the people, or let the world know, we have to also know. So a lot of information there. It's very simple now. It's all the information is online. So I think that's very important to focus on always that. Self-education, learn about your history, learn about your genocide. And the second point I would like to point is important, I think. UNPO, the United Nations Office for Unrepresented Nations, Circassians, I think as they have a seat there. We had this membership. Now it's stopped. So we have to, as a nation, we have to go back to pay that membership. And I think it will be done, but it's good to point that out. UNPO.
I will start with your second point. In regard to UNPO, it doesn't belong to the United Nations. This is a civil or NGO organization that is in Holland, and yes, true, the Circassians were part of it, but maybe for a reason or another, they are not anymore. But maybe it is a good idea to be there with all of these unrepresented peoples and nations of the world. Now, I come back to your first point, which is lack of awareness, I would say, or lack of knowledge. But I tell you my feeling and my experience. Like 10 years ago, when I was saying things about what has happened with the Circassians, people thought that I'm speaking Chinese or Indian. They didn't even want to listen. It's new information for them. They didn't know that we were deported from our homeland. They were giving people wrong information. Even they are passing wrong information that they came because of their religion. Who leaves his homeland because of religion? You can practice your religion in your own homeland. Doesn't mean that I have to go somewhere else to practice my religion. So after 10 years, I would say, we are blessed that many people now are aware of the Circassian question. Many people are aware of what has happened to us. Many people are aware of the disaster that we went through and the exodus that we had to go through. And the most important thing in that regard, that I noticed that the young people these days are more interested in the Circassian issues than the old people or the old generation. Maybe because of the internet. I'm sure that the internet is a very positive tool for our cause, and even there's Mr. Lars, I forgot his last name. He got his PhD in the University Larsen and the University of Copenhagen. He got his PhD on the Circassian electronic nation or something like this. That Circassians are reunited through internet now, and people know their homeland. They are more connected. They are closer to each other because of the internet. That's why I tell you myself, I know many people in Turkey, in USA, in Syria, in our homeland, and they are there. People in the homeland, they want our problems to be solved as well. All of them, the people that I see there. that's why it is good to build on this. To build on this, we have to go to more people and to increase the way, or I mean the rate of making such events like this first international conference on Circassians. Let's do it somewhere else, whether in Europe, Turkey, in any other country, but we have to keep this going on. This is a tool of spreading the information, spreading the right information, because people now are listening to us here. What we are saying, they are watching what we are doing, and we have to take the right steps. And I have one more thing to tell you, that I encourage anybody who can read English to read my book. This is not trying to do some advertisement for my book, but I have done a lot of research, a lot of gathering information, and put it in my book, Circassia, Born to be Free. Thanks.